Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to our Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I am your host, Hari-kirtana, and it is a great pleasure for me to be here with you, an honor to have you here with me. We are heading into the home stretch of the 9th chapter of Bhagavad-gita this evening, and Teresa, I'm glad you made it. Thank you very much. Jess, Raghav, and Shana, I am happy to see you as well. And the rest of you that are on your way in, if you would kindly let me know that you can hear me by raising your hands. Very good. I feel so validated. It's nice to be heard. Let's get on with the housekeeping portion of our program, as is our usual habit. If you are new to the satsang, you may find this information handy. You can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options in the upper right-hand corner. There is no need to worry about adjusting your microphone or your video camera because you can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you. If you would like to make yourself heard, however, the Q&A box is there for you. And anytime you have a question or a comment, please type something into the Q&A box. And I will be keeping my eye on that during the course of our time here together this evening. In our last class, we covered the simplicity of devotion and how Krishna sees his devotees. We covered verses 26 through 29, and we left off with a few verses just beyond this, wherein we started to get into some interesting showstoppers. So we'll continue with how Krishna sees his devotees and go full steam ahead into what I call a Bhagavad-gita showstopper, which is to say a verse that, if not properly understood or contextualized, can very easily result in one's just closing the book and saying, forget about it. We will review the chapter and speak about the most secret of all secrets. We will cover verses 30 through 34, but first, we will chant our invocation mantra. So, for those of you who are new to our satsang and new to transliterated Sanskrit, the diacritical marks are the additional marks that you see along with the Roman alphabet version of our Sanskrit mantra. The dot over the M indicates that we close the back of our tongues against the top of the back of the top of our mouths at the same time that we bring our lips together out front. The bars over the vowels, in this case A, indicate an open and long version of the vowel ah, as opposed to a short version So here we go. I chant, you chant back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Indicating the absolute reality, I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, who is all-pervading, and who is also the son of Vasudeva, Krishna. So last week, we stopped at verse 30. We're going to put verse 30 and 31 together as they actually go together as a complete thought. So verse 30, if one offers their love to me without deviation, then even if they have engaged in dreadful behavior, they are to be considered saintly, for such a person shall be rightly absolved. And then whoops, this is actually verse 31. Such a person quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. Boldly declare, O son of Kunti, that one who offers their love to me is never lost. Okay. So that could sound like a rationalization for someone who's a spiritual person on a spiritual path to behave badly and say, hey, I'm on a spiritual path, I'm a saintly person, and so you should just excuse me for my bad behavior. Or to even deny that such behavior is bad, to be in a state of denial. So the first thing I want to do is reassure everyone that this is in fact not the case. And this comes up a lot in modern yoga. Someone just the other day brought a video to my attention, you may have seen it on social media, of BKS Iyengar hitting one of his students because they didn't set the blanket up for headstand properly, and then making some explanation, rationalization as to why, as the guru, he had to hit the disciple to make sure they never forget this lesson or something like that. And as you can imagine, people were commenting on it about how bogus this was, and rightly so. I'll come back to this insofar as modern yoga and the whole discussion of abusive teachers goes. Meanwhile, what is being recommended here is that pure devotion is the method for the rectification of consciousness and absolution from bad behavior. In other words, absolution for bad behavior goes hand in hand with the rectification of consciousness through the process of pure devotional service to Krishna. Let's be clear about what he says here. One who offers their love to me without deviation, even if there is some dreadful behavior in their past, or even if along the path of bhakti, there is a fall down along that path. One stumbles, one caves to a bad habit, a material desire. Then as long as one picks oneself up, dusts oneself off, and continues along the path of devotion, one is understood to be rightly situated and is still should be considered saintly. I'll go into this in a little more detail. You may recall that earlier in the 7th chapter, Krishna spoke about the different kinds of people who never offer their love to him, who never approach him. And he described them in pretty derogatory terms. And even in this chapter, he talks about how foolish people don't really understand who he is or what his position is, and therefore engage in activities that really don't take them down the path of devotion. And now he's making a distinction. The person who never takes up this path of devotion, or who never acknowledges Krishna's position as the ultimate proprietor of everything, and therefore the obvious person to whom everything should be offered, has made a basic mistake in their calculations. These are people who are thinking that the world is for me, the world is my oyster, and my purpose for being in the world is to organize the world in such a way so that it fulfills my desires, as opposed to who Krishna is describing here as someone who is interested in fulfilling Krishna's desires. That's what it means to be a devotee of Krishna. So a person who is devoted to their own projects of material enjoyment is categorically different. And because they have made a fundamental miscalculation, 1 + 1 = 5, everything they do after that is going to be wrong and will take them progressively further and further away from a true understanding of how things are. That is to say, the ultimate spiritual reality behind the ephemeral material illusion. Whereas even when someone falters, makes a mistake, essentially, or somehow or other is simply not spiritually strong enough to resist a samskara, an impression on the mind that draws them to material life rather than spiritual life, and has them act in such a way as to be hurtful to others and ultimately to themselves. If they get that this is actually detrimental, and they understand the basic equation of 1 + 1 = 2, then whatever mistake they make further down the equation can be rectified by backing up to the basic understanding of spiritual truth and moving forward from there. So rightly resolved means that someone engaged in devotional yoga, as Krishna is describing here, will be purified of whatever tendencies that led to their bad behavior, as long as they remain fixed in their determination to improve their character by virtue of engaging in this purifying practice of bhakti yoga that Krishna is describing here. That means, first of all, the cultivation of humility, the understanding, I am being controlled by material nature. I want to be placing myself under the control of the spiritual nature. Therefore, an expression of remorse follows. Someone in this position that Krishna is describing thinks that they are sorry for having acquired and acted on some selfish material desire resulting in harm to others and ultimately to themselves. Therefore, they make a commitment to rectification, a commitment to do their best to resist the pull of any residual bad habits from past karma, from past samskaras, impressions on the mind, and act in such a way that will purify their consciousness. Here's a way to think about this. The beauty of the moon is not diminished by craters. Every sinner has a future, and every saint has a past. And someone who is genuinely engaged in saintly activity, who is also being honest about their own shortcomings. It's the activity that's saintly. The person may not yet be saintly, but one should consider them saintly simply because they are determined to walk a saintly path. This is actually good for our own spiritual development. Whereas if we criticize someone who is making a good faith effort to sincerely walk a spiritual path, it's like criticizing someone for being dirty while they're in the shower. It just does nothing good for us and doesn't do anything good for them. So when this sort of thing comes up with contemporary yoga gurus, I will say contemporary yoga gurus. because the overwhelming majority of them really actually are not qualified to have that title. So here's something to consider. When you look at the behavior of some of the modern yoga gurus in relationship to what Krishna is teaching here in this section of the Bhagavad-gita, which is very specifically about bhakti yoga, devotional service to Krishna. Are they practicing pure devotion to Krishna? If yes, they should be considered saintly, according to the Bhagavad-gita. If no, then they don't get a pass on anything. Are they teaching pure devotion to Krishna? Well, if all they're teaching is headstand or something less than devotion to Krishna, then what Krishna is speaking about here in the Bhagavad-gita does not apply to them. The qualification is one who offers their love to me without deviation. So that's the standard. If we see someone who is engaged in questionable activity and they are not making a good faith effort to offer their love to Krishna without deviation, then from the standpoint of the Bhagavad-gita, this verse does not apply to them. So therefore, it's not just a rationalization for bad behavior on the part of yoga gurus. If you have any questions about this verse and what I'm talking about as far as commentary on it, please go ahead and pop it in the Q&A, because I will be happy to take your questions. Now, this also does not obviate the need for the pursuit of justice. Karmic justice for harm brought to others is ultimately up to Krishna, who is ultimately in charge of the law of karma. So the law of karma acts, whether we pursue justice or not, justice will be done. One who is on the path of devotion is enjoined to tolerate whatever their karma happens to be, letting it play out the string while maintaining their position as a devotee and acting accordingly. So in the matter of social justice, we seek justice as a matter more of social duty than just for ourselves. So the principle of justice should be maintained. This verse does not say justice should not be done or pursued. It should be done, pursued for the sake of those who have harmed us and others as well. In other words, we are actually doing someone a favor by pursuing justice when someone has harmed another, because this is part of the karmic consequences that they should be facing. And we do it for the sake of our own devotional service. We can act as instruments of justice provided that we are following the principles of Dharma. That is to say, principles that are in harmony with cosmic order and the true nature of things. So, our conclusion is one should not find fault with someone who is sincerely on the path of pure devotion, even if they have exhibited some behavior that is not praiseworthy. Okay, so that brings us up to the end of that verse, which is that Krishna says to Arjuna, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. And this is interesting because Krishna doesn't always keep his own promises. but he always keeps the promises of his devotees. In fact, he'll break his own promises to keep the promise of his devotees. Later on in the battle that will follow after the pages of Bhagavad-gita, Krishna has vowed not to fight in the battle, but in order to keep the promise of his devotee, Bhishma, who's fighting on the other side, he breaks his promise to not fight. So Krishna knows he's got a reputation as being a guy who doesn't always keep his promises. But he does also have a reputation for always keeping the promise of his devotees, and Arjuna is his devotee. So he says, Arjuna, you say so. You say that this is so, and therefore I will be obliged now to make it so. All right, so we're going to move on to verses 32 and 34, but first, let's talk about the importance of punctuation. Here's a group of words in need of punctuation. Woman without her man is nothing. Well, let's see what happens when we give this some punctuation. We get woman without her man is nothing if you put the comma after woman and man. Or you get woman without her man is nothing. Colon after woman, comma after her. Well, completely different meaning, right? Well, in our next verse, this is going to become an issue. I'm going to give you two translations of this next verse. Usually I will translate things myself, but here I'm going to give you two different translations. And there's just a little bit of difference between the two translations, but it's a big and significant difference from the standpoint of how it's going to affect your perception of what's being said here. So this next verse, we're just going to do the English. O son of Pritha, Arjuna, those who take shelter in me, though they be of lower birth, dash, women, Vaishyas, merchants, and Shudras, workers, can attain the supreme destination. Now, in this translation, because of the placement of the dash after though they be of lower birth, it sounds like everyone is grouped together. Women, Vaishyas, and Shudras. That's a showstopper. But let's look at another translation. For those taking shelter of me, O Partha, whether they come from troubled wombs, or whether they be women, tradespeople, or skilled workers, even they reach the supreme goal. That's slightly, but still importantly, different. So, this verse refers to the Vedic social orders, as does the next verse, which will refer to the first two of the social orders, the Brahmins, the spiritually enlightened intellectuals, or the head of the social body, and the Kshatriyas, who are in charge of governance and defense, the arms, the protectors of society. Here in this verse, the Vaishyas, business people who are engaged in agriculture and commerce, along with Shudras, artisans, artists, skilled laborers, etc., are mentioned, as are women. Okay, let's take a closer look at that. Now, the first translation comes from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's Bhagavad-gita as it is. And what's interesting about that particular translation is really in the commentary, where Srila Prabhupada does not mention women in his commentary at all. So the whole issue is not even addressed. What he does speak about are is the distinction between the two lower social orders of business people and laborers, and the higher two social orders of the administrative class or warrior class, and the Brahmins. The second translation comes from Graham Schwagg's Bhagavad-gita, the Beloved Lord's Secret Love Song. And there's no commentary with the verse. The particular phrase that's being translated here is Papa Yonaya, which can be translated as born of a lower family or born of a degraded womb. So Yonaya refers to yoni or womb. And then Striya means women. So there is a commentary, Sridhar Swami's commentary. Sridhar Swami is an authorized commentator from the Rudra Sampradaya, one of the 4 Vaishnava Sampradayas. And he's working from a translation, as far as we know, that says, even those who may be born from the wombs of degraded women. Now, that's also very different. So this is a very good example of how different translations and different angles of vision on a translation are going to affect how you understand a problematic verse like this. So here's his commentary on this. Devotion to the Supreme Lord Krishna purifies one of previously abominable behavior and liberates even low-born and unqualified persons from the perpetual cycle of birth and death. This is being confirmed here that those born sinfully out of wedlock, those born in the poorest and most degraded of families, such as meat eaters, those who are of the mercantile class and engaged only in business, the menial working class, women, and all others who are devoid of Vedic knowledge. So the problematic part here is all the way at the very end, because it sounds, and of course, this is commentary that's quite old, and I don't have the original Sanskrit to refer to. Women are obviously, as a class, not all devoid of Vedic knowledge. In fact, women who nor are they incapable of understanding Vedic knowledge, given what I'm looking at in my participant list here. If women were incapable of understanding Vedic knowledge, I'd truly be wasting my time here. So that's obviously not the case. And a woman who understands Vedic knowledge and is acting on the basis of Vedic knowledge transcends all of these different social orders in the same way that a man would, because the very first understanding of Vedic knowledge is we are not these material bodies. The whole idea of I am a man, I am a woman, I am American, I am African, I am this or that or the other thing. These are all upadis, temporary material designations, and the true nature of the self is beyond that. So, those who are devoid of Vedic knowledge obviously cannot be all women as a class. Now, there are some takes on Vedic culture that place women as a class in between the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas, which is to say, below the warrior class, but above the business class, which actually is questionable insofar as obviously there are women who are born with Brahminical qualities and women who are born with warrior qualities. So I'm not sure what to make of that kind of generalized classification. But here's what I do know. You find both men and women with these various propensities. You also find that everybody in America, at least, in the Western countries, both men and women, are born in the poorest and most degraded families, such as meat eaters, those who are in the mercantile class and engaged only in business, and the menial working class. Now, in Kali Yuga, This designation includes most academics and career military officers. It's not like the intellectual class in academia in Kali Yuga, in this particular age, has the qualities of a Brahmin. Remember, a Brahmin is not just an intellectual. A Brahmin is a spiritually enlightened intellectual. That is to say, someone who is operating under the influence of the quality of goodness amongst the three gunas. So, quick review. In the material world, we have these three qualities of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance, that act as primary colors that blend together to make every hue, tint, and shade of every person, place, and thing in the material world. And our objective in yoga is to elevate ourselves from the influence of the qualities of ignorance and passion up to the mode of goodness, or that is to say, to develop Brahminical qualities. Well, most academics do not have Brahminical qualities. They are as deeply affected by the modes of passion and ignorance as any business person or anyone else. It just happens that they have higher IQs or interests in intellectual subject matter. But the mode of goodness is not synonymous with intelligence. So in Kali Yuga, we've got a very equal playing field. And the practical distinction between men, women, and these different classes is practically meaningless. Therefore, we should consider that what Krishna is telling us here, that is to say, the truly important takeaway here, is that everyone is qualified to engage in the process of devotional yoga that he is describing, and will be purified of whatever issues, things, problems, karma that they have by taking up this process. There's no disqualification based on gender or ethnicity or nationality or any other upadi, temporary material designation. So that's the worthwhile takeaway from this verse. The Vedic social orders were discussed in detail in class number 4. If anyone has yet to get to that class or wants to go back to it to get a review of how the Vedic social orders compare to social hierarchies in contemporary Western culture, you can go back to class number 4 and check that out. Meanwhile, if anyone has a comment or a question about this particular showstopper verse, please go ahead and pop that into the Q&A so we can address that question or comment. This is a verse that gets a lot of attention from practitioners of modern yoga, and for a very good reason. Meanwhile, moving on, in the next verse, Krishna indicates as follows. After having, let's just read that verse again. This is the Graham Schwagg's translation. For those taking shelter of me, O Partha, whether they come from troubled wombs, or whether they be women, tradespeople, or skilled workers, even they reach the supreme goal. Then in the next verse, 33, how much more so then for the righteous Brahmins and the saintly kings who are devoted to me? Therefore, having come to this temporary and unhappy world, now offer your love to me. Krishna is trying to encourage Arjuna, a warrior, that the very nature of how he's constituted is such that he should be embracing, enthusiastically embracing the practice that Krishna is describing for him. Now, this verse is the preamble for the next verse, which is the last verse of the chapter. The next verse is the most important verse in the Bhagavad-gita. Remember, the Gita begins with the question from the blind king Dhritarashtra. Now that my sons and the sons of Pandu are assembled on the battlefield, ready to fight, what did they do? And therefore, the Bhagavad-gita is a book about what we should do when we are here in this temporary and unhappy world called the material world, where which Krishna has already described in previous verses and in previous chapters leading up to this one, as a place that is real insofar as we really experience it, but is temporary. And as such, is a place of sorrow from the highest planet down to the lowest. Every place in the material world is a place of sorrow on account of everything here being temporary. Sustainable happiness is not possible. The best happiness one can attain does not really compare categorically to spiritual happiness. And whatever happiness we can attain is not only short-lived, but it takes a great deal of endeavor just to acquire that. So we'll chant the next verse together. The diacritical marks for this verse are all the same as our invocation mantra, with the exception of the dot under the H at the end of the last word of the last line, which indicates that a short version of the vowel that precedes the H will be echoed back. So I'm going to chant each line. You're going to chant each line back. Here we go. Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yuktvaivam atmanam matparayanaha. The translation. Direct your mind toward me. Become my devotee. Offer your sacrifices to me and act in reverence for me. Thus you will surely come to me, having completely absorbed yourself in me alone. All right. This verse appears precisely at the center of the Bhagavad-gita. And the first two lines will show up again verbatim at the end of the Bhagavad-gita in chapter 18, verse 65. The rest of the verse is the same message, just using slightly different words, but the meaning is the same. And it is the only time in the Bhagavad-gita where Krishna repeats himself verbatim. This verse also is an echo of an earlier verse in this chapter, verse 19, always glorifying me, endeavoring with great determination, and honoring me by their devotion. They worship me in a state of perpetual union. So here Krishna is describing one who is fully immersed in the path of yoga that he is describing in this chapter and that he will elaborate on further in the next. So from the standpoint of hermeneutics, or the science of understanding the message, the Gita is a book about dharma, or in other words, the essential nature of the world, our own essential nature, our true nature, as you would hear about it in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It's about how to act in response to one's destiny so that one harmonizes our conditional nature, that is to say, the particular propensities that we have in our temporary material lives, with our constitutional identity as eternal spirit souls. Or in other words, how do we harmonize our conditional nature with sanatana dharma, or eternal nature? And the Gita begins with this question: how did they act? What did they do? The very first word is dharma. So we understand that the Bhagavad-gita is about how to act in order to realize the perfection of religious principles, which is how Krishna describes the knowledge that he is giving to Arjuna in this chapter. So this is the crescendo of the Bhagavad-gita, the answer to the question, what should we do? How should we act in response to our destiny? This is how. By glorifying Krishna, endeavoring, by directing our minds to Krishna, becoming Krishna's devotee, offering our sacrifices to Krishna, and acting in reverence for Krishna. Krishna is speaking from the position of Bhagavan, the Supreme Person. And there are some translations of the Gita that contain commentaries that this encouragement that we should act in such a way as to offer everything that we do to Krishna, the person who is using first person description of himself as, I'm the one you should be meditating on, I'm the one you should be acting for, etc. Some of those translations will say, well, it's not Krishna, the person speaking the Gita, it's the unmanifest within Krishna that he really means you should be offering yourself to. And for my money, that just doesn't make very much sense, because Krishna has already described that he is categorically different from everyone else, insofar as there's no difference between his inside and his outside. For us, we're different. We are spirit souls, atmas, in material bodies. So there's a distinction between us as evidenced by consciousness, our consciousness, and the material body, the material mind, the different layers of physical and metaphysical stuff that acts as our container that we are conscious of. We are conscious of our physical bodies. We're conscious of our minds and the fluctuations, the movements of the mind. We are conscious of our sense of perception. We are conscious of our energy level. We're conscious of the level of joy that we experience, be it high or low, just by virtue of being. but we're the person who is conscious. And Krishna has made it clear that he is also the supreme consciousness, and that his form is not different from himself. Therefore, there is no difference between Krishna's inside and Krishna's outside. Not only that, but to say that one should be surrendering to something beyond Krishna is to say that Krishna doesn't know what he's talking about, or is purposely being obtuse, that he's not saying what he means. Well, why would the personal form of supreme consciousness say something other than what he actually means? That also does not make any sense. So I'm not buying that interpretation of what Krishna is saying here. He's using the first person. Become my devotee, meditate on me. Okay, well, if I'm to accept the teachings of the Bhagavad-gita as authoritative, then I have to accept what Krishna is saying. Any comments or questions, please pop them into the Q&A box. Meanwhile, let's take a quick look back at this chapter. Okay. We began the chapter with Krishna declaring that this knowledge that he is imparting to Arjuna and by extension to us is the sovereign science, Raja Vidya, the king of knowledge, or the king of secrets, Raja Guhyam. And we'll come back to this principle of hierarchies of secrets in just a moment. He also characterizes realization of this knowledge as the perfection of religious principles, that is to say, universal principles that lead one to religious experience or union with the source of one's being. Arjuna's qualification for receiving this knowledge, according to Krishna, is because he is free from envy. Now, in the beginning of this chapter, we hear about Arjuna's qualification for hearing this knowledge. In the next chapter, Krishna will speak about his motivation for giving this knowledge. We heard Krishna say that a person who does not understand Krishna as a person is a fool. And such fools, in Krishna's words, deride him when he appears in a human form, or a human-like form, I should say. The Bhagavad-gita does not offer us an anthropomorphic philosophy of a God we create in our image. Rather, it proposes that we have a form because Krishna, or the Supreme Person, has a form. That is to say, our status as being a person with a form is derived from the fact that the Supreme Person, of whom we are all a part, is a person who has a form. Krishna's form is, as we have said, categorically different, inconceivably different, insofar as it is an unlimited form, which sounds like an oxymoron of sorts, but it's actually a paradox. And the Supreme Person is the ultimate resolution of all paradoxes. Krishna described great souls as those who perpetually glorify him, or that the perpetual glorification of Krishna is the activity of those who are elevated in realized knowledge. You can tell someone is elevated on the path of devotional yoga because all they do is sit around and chant all day. By contrast, there are many different paths one can take for the sake of pursuing material enjoyment. And as a result, there are many destinations. This was a debunking of the idea that every single deity or demigod is a different face of the same one God or supreme being. Rather, Krishna makes a distinction between himself as a person and the various personalities who are given the responsibility of managing universal affairs and to whom one can appeal for different benedictions leading to material well-being. One who worships the demigods goes to the planets of the demigods, the worlds of the demigods. One who worships one's forefathers will go to one's ancestors. One who worships ghosts, black magic, will go to the ghosts. But one who is exclusively engaged in devotion to Krishna will go to Krishna. So this is a very different concept than what we hear from contemporary mythologians who speak about perennial philosophy and such like that. The idea that there is one non-person, some being, beyond all these different faces, and you can just pick and choose whichever face you like, and it all will go to the same being beyond being. We have a question. You said that elevated people sit around and chant all day, and yet in an earlier class you talked about engagement and how advanced people are actually engaged with the world. Please explain. Very good question. Yes. So a person who is really advanced in spiritual life will go out into the world and chant. That's one thing. And then while one engages with the world, one is still chanting. Remember, this verse just said, direct your mind toward me, which is to see, another way of saying this is always think of me and offer your sacrifices to me and act in reverence to me. So it's not that we go out and act in the world and forget about Krishna, but rather we are constantly engaged in remembrance of Krishna and connecting Krishna to everything we do. So here's a way that one can make advancement on the path of devotional yoga. Whatever you're doing, just add Krishna to it. If you can add Krishna, then keep doing it. If you find that it's something that is really, really hard to add Krishna to or remember Krishna while doing, well, then maybe it's not an activity that is going to be as supportive of your aspirations for advancement on the path of devotion. How much of a range is this? A few years ago, I wrote a blog post on how to understand the Bhagavad-gita by watching the Super Bowl. It can be done. Years earlier, I told a friend of mine that I was feeling a little bad because I was spending my time reading the New York Times instead of reading the Bhagavad-gita. And he said, I read the New York Times to understand the Bhagavad-gita. So I thought about it differently. I realized that it wasn't that I shouldn't be reading the New York Times, it's that I need to recontextualize my engagement with the news of the world in order to spiritualize the experience. Okay, so you literally have to be chanting all the time? Ultimately, yeah, the kirtan goes on in your head 24/7. If one immerses oneself in this uninterrupted meditation on Krishna, mantra meditation, which I'll get to in just a moment, it just so happens, is the recommended process by which one can engage in constant remembrance. The first 4 of 9 processes of devotional service, of devotional yoga, are hearing, chanting, remembering, and serving. So you hear about Krishna and you hear the instruction, Satatam kirtayanto mam, always glorifying, always engaged in kirtan or chanting. Okay, I heard that. And the results of that are that one becomes purified of all bad karmic reactions from the past, burns up the seeds of any karma that is way off in my future, and stops generating new karma. That's a good thing. That's a great thing. In fact, that is so important, it's worth not doing anything else but that, if we actually understand the implications of what it means to be caught in a cycle of repeated birth and death in the material world since time immemorial, and potentially perpetually forever. So now that becomes like a high priority thing. So you organize your life in such a way so that you can completely absorb your mind in Krishna and connect everything that you do to Krishna. And by doing that, you literally can be chanting all the time, because everything you do is connected to and reminding you of Krishna. It becomes like a feedback loop of spiritual engagement. So, does that answer your question? Please let me know. Okay, very good. As time is running out, let's finish up our summary here. So, Bhakti Yoga is simple. Nothing complicated about it. One doesn't have to offer anything fancy. Just add Krishna to what you're doing. And the practice leads to purity. And complete absorption in Krishna is the ultimate perfection of religious principles, according to our conclusion of this chapter. Now remember, another thing we talked about in our second class on this chapter are the 4 levels of instruction that the Bhagavad-gita takes us to. We have general instructions at the beginning, the difference between spirit and matter, between the self and the not self. The understanding that we are not these temporary material bodies, we're eternal spiritual beings. Okay, so that's our basic baseline yogic knowledge. Then we have secret instructions, understanding Brahman, the spiritual energy of which everything is ultimately made. The material world is a transformation of spiritual energy. The energies of Brahman are transformed into this material world, but Brahman is not transformed. Brahman remains. That is the Sat, or eternality, feature of spirit. Then a more secret instruction is about the Paramatma, the idea that the Supreme Person exists within the heart of each individual person. Each individual Atma, you and I, are understood to be the size of 1/10,000th the tip of a hair, according to the Vedic way of giving us some sense of what that size really is, like subatomic, basically. And within each of our hearts, our spiritual hearts, there is a supreme Atma. And it's the same supreme Atma in my heart as yours and everyone else's, present everywhere, all pervading. Hence the Chit, or knowledge, feature, along with the Sat feature. Then the most secret instruction is Bhagavan. There's a supreme person. There's a unique individual within whom all of these other attributes of divinity are contained. And that's Krishna. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. Blessed Lord said, is how each of everything that Krishna says is introduced into the Gita. So this is now the form of the Supreme Person that facilitates a relationship of love. which is the most secret instruction, that the Supreme Person is a person who wants to engage in a relationship of love with other persons, you and me. And that's the most secret instruction. But there's actually another level of instruction. And that's the most secret of all secrets. Here it is. We can only get love for Krishna from someone who has love for Krishna. So Krishna has told us that we can get whatever we want directly from him. We don't need a celestial middleman. We don't need to go to the demigods to do this. So he can fulfill all desires, but the thing is, there's one thing that you're not going to get from Krishna, and that's love for Krishna. Krishna is inviting us to engage in a relationship of love with him. And he makes it abundantly clear that there's no greater attainment in the world than love for him, because one who offers their love to Krishna gets Krishna himself in return, the Supreme Person. There's nothing greater than that. So that's the greatest benediction that one can receive, is love for Krishna. But you won't get that directly from Krishna, because Krishna has love for his devotees, doesn't have love for himself. And you can't give what you don't have. So if you can't get love from Krishna, who can you get it from? Well, you can get love for Krishna from someone who has love for Krishna, someone who is already a devotee of Krishna. Therefore, this is the most secret of all secrets. The greatest devotee of Krishna is Radha. And I got your question. I'll come to it. So Radha is the internal power of spiritual love within Krishna, and that is his feminine aspect. And Radha means, Radharani, Rani means queen. So the queen of Krishna's heart. Radha is the one who loves Krishna the most. So this mantra, the Hari-Krishna mantra, begins with Hare, which is a vocative form of Hara, a name of Radha, asking her to give us love for Krishna. Therefore, we lead with a request to the feminine principle of divinity. So Hare Krishna is Radha and Krishna together. Krishna, Krishna, Hare, Hare. Radha and Krishna separated, because love and separation is even more intense than love and union. And then Hari Rama, Hari Rama. Rama is a name of Krishna, again meaning the ultimate bliss. So united once again. And then Rama Rama, Hari Hari. The love in separation that once again brings about reunion and the bliss of reunion. So that's what this mantra is about. And by absorbing oneself and constantly chanting this mantra, one is actually asking for love of Krishna from the person who has the most love of Krishna. And that is the most confidential knowledge. So why do I say that it's a secret? Isn't it right out there for anyone to read? Yes, it's an open secret. It's right there. And you can read many, many editions of the Bhagavad-gita, and somehow or other, even though it's right there, the translator misses it. The commentator misses it. The focus is on something else, on merging into the impersonal Brahman, on doing one's duty, on so many things. You can have so many different conceptions of what the ultimate message of the Bhagavad-gita is from so many different translations and interpretations of the Bhagavad-gita. But if you simply take it at face value that there's a person named Krishna who's the supreme being who's telling you just very simply and flat out, this is what it's all about. This is where it all goes to. This is the ultimate thing. Okay, well, it's right there. So you're right. It's a secret hiding in plain sight. Amazing. Tonight's class, and thank you for staying for a few extra minutes with me this evening. We looked at how Krishna sees his devotees, even the ones who are not so perfect. We looked at our showstopper verse of who and who is not of lower birth. Actually, all of us. But lucky for us, this entire chapter reassures us that even though our births are not particularly auspicious, still we are qualified to receive transcendental knowledge and realize that knowledge by acting on the basis of that knowledge. And we heard the most secret of all secrets as we concluded our chapter 9 with the most important central verse of the Bhagavad-gita, verse 34. If you have any further questions, I will stick around for them. If you have questions after the fact, please email me at hari@hari-kirtana.com. And yes, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam, always chanting about me, my name, Hari-kirtana. Das means the servant of the constant chanting of the names of Hari, which is another name of Krishna, indicating one who removes obstacles on the path of devotional service. Next week, we will begin chapter 10, the Yoga of Divine Presence. We will hear about Krishna's motivation for speaking this most confidential of all secrets, for revealing to us this secret now hiding in plain sight. And we will hear from Krishna how to see him and how to understand the inconceivable Supreme Person. We will cover the first 7 verses, 1 through 7. And that's the end for tonight. This has been 1 year of Bhagavad-gita Satsang. This is our 52nd class, and we are exactly at the midpoint of Bhagavad-gita at the end of the 9th chapter, 9 more to go to finish out to the 18th chapter. So thank you all very, very much for staying with me this evening and for being with me for all of our classes. I'm looking forward to hearing from you if you have any further questions or comments. And please remember to head on over to the Facebook group and add some comments or questions there. I will look forward to seeing you there as well until I see you next week. Thank you very, very much for being here. It's an honor to have you here with me and a pleasure for me to be spending this time with you. Have a nice night.